Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Dave Hernley. I'm the creator of Starship Horizons, and here we are on our first Twitter stream. Twitter. Wow, great successful start already. Posted on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere, but obviously we're here on Twitch. This is my first attempt at streaming, so you'll see all the pratfalls of that as we get started. With me on audio is Syntax, some also known as Lee. Lee, say hi to everybody.
How you doing?
Hey. So on the stream, as I go through the roadmap here, we're just going to kind of take it easy. I'm going to talk through a couple different phases, mainly three literal phases, near, mid, and long term, and what they represent, what's in those phases, what are we looking at timelines, those kinds of things, and we'll just kind of go through that. If you have questions, post them in the Twitch stream, in the chat. Lee will kind of be monitoring that, and then he'll be feeding me questions from you guys. And I do encourage questions. So some of this, if you've been in the Discord, will sound familiar. I'm pretty open about a lot of my roadmap and the things I like to do, but certainly this was kind of a first attempt to really kind of inform everybody what's on my roadmap, where my head is in terms of when things will happen with what we're doing with Starship Horizons. A lot of the things that we're going to be talking about are going to be tied to gameplay, evolving the gameplay from a content perspective, whether that's literal content like a mission or a new ship definition or new planets or whatever, but also evolving the content around what each station has available to them from a gameplay standpoint. So you'll hear a few themes as we kind of go through this. But welcome everyone, and let's get started. Let's start on near term. So what does near term really mean? It's things that I'm actively working on right now. So these are things that are either near completion. Some work has been done on these items to some degree, so they are actively being worked on. A lot of what we're going to talk about on this near term slide are items that are tied to what I just talked about with content, right? Horizons has been in active development on some level since 2013. So it's been 7 years as a solo developer working on this project, mostly in my spare time. But the overall product structure, capabilities, and all the infrastructure that builds on the experience that creates things like the modules and the modular system and the missions and everything that goes with it, we've gotten to a point where I can really start to look at fine-tuning gameplay balance and how I can say, okay, if I want to create certain missions to expand the storytelling of Horizons, what do I need to do that? And in turn, the things that you're going to hear me talk about also are provided for game masters to be able to use for their own purposes. So let's hit the slide and get chatty here. Near term. So near term is, again, everything that's active development. So the rest of, here, November, December, and bleeding into early part of 2021, that's what we call near term. So, over the next 3 to 4 months, give or take, is what we're talking about here. So let's just talk through the slides. So we'll start up here on the top left corner, and that's, of course, the flight console. So what are we going to be doing with that? Flight has always been one of the stations that's frankly been the most well-rounded. There's plenty for a flight officer to do, right? You're always flying somewhere, docking, navigating, chasing enemies, avoiding enemies, etc. So they've always had stuff to do, but we do want to evolve every station and add certain things. The first one for flight is nav buoys. You're going to hear me talk about other buoys / drones for pretty much every station as we go through this. Today we already have, shuttles, and we have repair drones, but now we're going to have nav buoys. Now that adds a couple of layers just to mission complexity, right? So it could be finding a nav buoy, deploying nav buoys, etc. So that'll be an added component for the flight officer to be able to control, manage, what have you. And then it's a small thing, but if you've been paying attention to recent builds that have been released, distances. And what I'm really talking about there is putting distances in a game context. So today, if you actually click on, say, the system map or the system, or the galactic map, if you will, of the star of all the different star systems. When you click on that, it'll actually tell you how many light years you are from it: light years, light minutes, light seconds, depending on the distance. So that's how far you are in light terms, but that doesn't necessarily tell you how far you are in your ship's capabilities. Meaning, if you can go 10 times the speed of light, well, then what does that really mean? So ETAs will be available. So you can say, the flight officer can say, Captain, our ETA to the star system is X seconds, X minutes, whatever. And it's a nice addition for flight officers. And again, feel free to chat questions as we go through this. I mean, I'll do a full Q&A at the end if anybody has other things too, but I welcome comments or questions as we go. So that's flight for at least the near term here. Tactical, weapon configuration. So in Horizons, weapons they have a certain power capability and they have a certain range, whether it's a missile weapon or a projectile particle weapon like a photon cannon or whatever, or even lasers. They have a distance. And what we're going to be allowing the tactical officer to do is to adjust those things. So let's say you have a laser that is effective up to 20 kilometers. Well, what if you could double that distance to 40 kilometers? Well, you'll be able to do that, but what it will in turn accomplish is it will have your power. So if it does X amount of damage, normally when you double the distance, it will have that. And then the opposite can be true as well. If I intentionally dial back the range on my weapons to say half their range, it will increase the power. So the tactical officer can be constantly adjusting those to get in some smaller shots at smaller craft at longer range. But when you're dealing with other capital ships in closer proximity, you can actually dial that up. Or dial it more back, if you will, so that your ranges are shorter, but your power is greater. So it gives them more of a literal tactical nuance to what they can do. And again, on the topic of drones, mines, being able to not only lay mines, but detect mines and potentially defuse them. And then turrets. So being able to deploy turrets to protect, say, a comm station or a series of containers, or things that might need that don't have a tactical capability. And you can leave those behind and go somewhere else if necessary during a mission. And then this one actually was suggested by one of our users in Discord, and I really love the idea. So this is actually coming fairly soon, which is target counts. So with target counts, what that literally means is if I have a particular target on the radar and it's a threat, you'll actually be able to see how many of your weapons are currently trained on that item. It'll be a red numerical number in that corner that you'll be able to see, which is really cool. So you can see based on your current loadout what your best angle is in terms of combat. Is it a broadside? Is it forward, etc.? And I'll pause for a second. Lee, do we have anything questions-wise?
Yes, Hemacast asking, will the AI for other ships be able to configure weapons as well? Or will they each have a standard configuration?
So that's a great question. So I would say that is an ongoing, meaning I would say that's near, mid, and long term. The AI for NPCs will constantly evolve to be more nuanced, including that. Because you're going to hear me talk about some other things on this slide and the next slide that will affect how NPCs think. So I think it's fair to say, yes, NPCs will be able to make the same tactical analysis because, for example, they may be heavily injured, but be able to adjust their weapons to a certain range where they're staying out of harm's way, but still dealing some kind of damage. So yes, over time, I would say you will see that. Okay. I'll press on, Lee, and please jump in if as we have other questions. So, science consoles. So with the science console, that's one I've always, just from a personal standpoint, wanted to do more with. It was never complete, in my opinion. It does fine today. It serves its capability well, but I have always said, and a lot of people that I've talked to will hear me say, deduction. I want each station to have some level of deduction capability when it comes to mission objectives. So with science, that's really about not just detecting what an object's shields are or their hull, but potentially being able to detect certain things that are on the ship. And we're going to be talking about science on both slides here. So you hear me talk about more of those details. But really, it's going to go into more depth than what you just have that list on the right-hand side. And in conjunction with more detail, we'll be adding limitations. And you'll hear me talk about limitations in a couple of places. Today, if I'm in a particular planet, say I'm at Earth, I can scan anything that's on that map. It doesn't matter how far it is. That will be changing. As I adjust the balance of gameplay, you will, and I mentioned limitations, you'll start to see some of those come into play, because I'm really trying to dial in not only the fun factor, but the challenge. So what does scan limitations really mean? It's talking about a couple things. One, the obvious one, which is obstructions, not being able to scan things that are behind a planet. You shouldn't be able to see those, right? And in fact, fun fact, Horizons has always had the ability, the engine, to take into account obstructions. I turned it off very early in development because we did a lot of STEM-based events, educational events with students, with NASA and a few other things that I felt like it was too hard for them. So that's why it got turned off very early on. It'll come back. So it's not just obstructions, but also range. So science will be able to only scan to a certain range. And again, similar to what we talked about with tactical, engineering will be able to assist sciences by changing the sensor capabilities, the component, to, again, lengthen the scan range, if you will. So, but talking about scanning is going to overall get a lot of changes, and we've already talked about a couple, but the next one is detecting when being scanned. So going back to Hemacast's question about the AI on NPC ships, not only will you be able to detect when you're being scanned, but NPCs will as well. So that's important to say. You might have a neutral ship that's out there that doesn't really care about you. They're not worried about you, but then you scan them and they consider that a hostile act. They may turn on you. So having that as a kind of nuance is important. But you'll also know when you're being scanned. So that's really important. And again, it can affect the flow of a mission. And then lastly on science, for the near term at least, is probes. Again, yet another, a drone, if you will, but being able to launch probes locally, again, to the other side of a planet potentially. So you can scan that, where you don't have to go around the planet to check and see if there's something nasty there. But also being able to send probes to other star systems without having to go there and detect what's going on in that star system from afar. All right. I'll pause there. How are we doing, Lee? Anything question-wise?
I think this looks more like a comment. If scanning you is a hostile act to you, I'm going to consider you hostile from the get-go.
Well, it's funny. This list has been put together for a while, but I have to chuckle because this is not a spoiler, by the way, so I'm not going to release any Mandalorian spoilers. But the last episode of The Mandalorian has a bit in it regarding transponders, and the lack of a transponder being turned on, and that being considered a hostile or deceptive act, which I literally was chuckling the whole time during that part of the episode because I was like, I'm working on that right now. Okay, and actually, I actually am glancing over at the chat. I see one, Lee. Any interaction between science and the planets, researching planets minigame. So let me talk about minigames in general. I have historically, and I will probably likely continue to steer away from what I would call anything a mini game, only because, from my experience, not just with Starship Horizons, but just with development in general, mini games are needed first, but they become very not boring, not monotonous. It's just kind of rinse repeat, right? And that's also a problem with just gameplay of any game, right? You want to try to create as much variation as possible so that they feel like it's always new as much as you can. That's hard to do. But talking about mini games in general, I will steer away from something that is literally a, rearrange the tiles to fix this kind of thing. That I will probably never do. However, going back to the, excuse me, the first part of your question, which was interaction between science and the planets. Yes, I mentioned it where the scanning detail will be improving. Planets is a big part of that. And I'm going to hold on any more comments because I'm going to be touching on a deeper part of your question on the next slide. So I'll hit that there. But so hold up. You will have answers, sir. I promise. So there's that. I will press on. And again, folks, jump in with questions. I appreciate the questions that have hit so far. Thank you, guys. Miles, I'll come back to you on the next slide. So engineering. Shield frequencies. Now, that's not new to the bridge sims genre. In fact, most other bridge sims have this. I have never had it, somewhat intentionally, just because I was waiting until I had the right implementation of what I wanted for this. So when you see shield frequencies appear, that will take on a different role or a different style than you've seen in other bridge sims, but it's a similar construct, right? You want to have a shield frequency that then, the players, if I can scan and figure out what their shield frequency is, I can adjust my weapons so that I can then fire on them, and have a more effective hits, right? So all of that is true. So that'll be coming. But I'm going to be talking about some other nuances to shields as well, not just shield frequencies. So the idea being the engineer adjusts the shield frequency, not tactical, for your ship, and then tactical adjusts the weapons to adapt to a particular frequency. So, and I see Bacon there. Shield to shield interference would be cool. Bacon, elaborate on that for me. I think I know what you're asking, but give me a little more detail there, if you would. And I'll press on briefly while you're typing, talking about the engineering console. So modified energy use based on levels. So what this means is today, all of the energy use that you see in the bar, if you will, is based on the consumption rate of the object. And what consumption rate is, its charging factor, okay? So with that charging factor, that's how much it consumes, regardless of what its level is. What's going to be changing is, a good example is shields and engines. Engines right now, when they're sitting at 100%, the level that is, they sit at 100% all the time. That's not going to be the case anymore. You may have the charging rate set to 1, right? So it's set to normal charging rate. But if you're sitting still and not going anywhere, your engines aren't actively in use. So you're not using that energy, therefore that energy is available. Conversely, if I'm at full burst, right, either 100% or I go to the burst mode, I'm using full or even double energy. So that energy has to be there for me to go to full speed. So that, and the same with shields. So you'll see that come into play because, again, this goes back to me trying to balance the gameplay experience. And all right, Bacon, let's see what you got here. Make it cancel out if you're close enough with the right frequency to interfere. Also means too close for missiles, switching guns, etc. But it also assumes a larger shield bubble and higher risk of collision. Interesting. I'll have to think about that. I understand what you're asking now. Where basically it's almost like two frequencies hitting up against each other and what effects that has on either ship, for example. Or like you said, if they're either canceling out or even causing each other interference. I'll give that some thought. Interesting idea. I don't think we talked about that before. So good something to think about there. I have some more to say about shields a little bit later too, so you'll hear that coming through. Now, moving on, because we still have a couple more slides to get to, is communications, which will soon be rebranded operations, and that's happening again in this near term. So comms has always had more to do than just talking to other ships. They've always had control of the alert status, and they've always shown the cargo. But in builds in the last year and a half, you have kind of much more detail on the cargo. You can actually place cargo on shuttles to then ship somewhere else, which has been an extra gameplay mechanic. That will evolve. But with that, because they're now operations, they're doing other things like handling your fighter squadrons, which the Horizons has always been a carrier class vessel, just fighters have not been present. But imagine your operations officer being able to launch, blue squadron, red squadron, and then actually send them out. So, important note: communications, aka operations now, will not issue orders to them other than launch and return. They're essentially air traffic control, if you will, for your vessel, the Horizons or whatever vessel you may be flying. So they don't issue tactical orders. Tactical will have that ability. And you'll do it by squadron. So on the tactical screen, and I didn't mention it up on the tactical console, but the tactical console will actually have, squadron, blue squadron, attack this target, etc. So you'll be able to control that. So tactical, more than just shooting weapons and firing missiles, can then issue orders to individual ships, which is nice. And then the last thing I'll talk about on this slide with operations is comm buoys, which again goes to the idea that every console, every role will have some kind of a deployable object. We talked about nav buoys, turrets, mines, and comm buoys as well, and that can be mission critical based on the mission requirements. So that's those so far. Let's hop over to consoles as a generic concept. In recent builds, as recently as just release 19, we've been doing more radar improvements. That will continue, including scaling. And all that really means is scaling the objects in the radar appropriate to their size. So that already happens now with the current release. Technically, scaling is already active with what we've done with the new clusters, like the asteroid fields and such, already show at scale. So do planets, but we'll simply be turning it on for things like star bases. So they'll appear much larger. Fighters will appear much smaller by design. So everything will have a sense of scale. And so that'll be evolving. Now, the next item on this, though, is explosion indicators. And I'll touch on this real quick. And Miles, I see you have a question there. Let me finish this up and I'll get right to you, sir. Explosion indicators are more than just showing like a blip on the radar that an explosion happened. It's literally, and I kind of go back to, and I'm showing my age, but a game called Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator, which was an arcade game from the early 80s, a vector graphics game. But when you would fire a photon torpedo, it would hit, and then you would see the area of effect bubble, just kind of circle out, and anything it hit would be damaged. That happens today in Horizons, where if you fire a different missiles have different areas of effect, and a lot of active players know this, right? But the point here is you'll actually see that area of effect fan out, and you'll know if you're getting hit or not, or you can see what other ships have been damaged as a result. So that one it's a nice informative aspect of a gameplay mechanic that's already in play. It's just giving the players more information. So Miles, let's hit on your question here. Any plans to be able to fly the fighters that are launched? I know you can be a fighter, but can you be one of the launched fighters in the future? Absolutely. Absolutely. So the idea is absolutely that you can be, Red 1 for Red Squadron and launch. And you can start the game sitting, on the flight deck of the Horizons waiting to be launched until the operations officer says, Red Squadron to your fighters. Very much, call back to Wing Commander, if you will, where everybody, or old classic Battlestar Galactica, where, everybody's running to their fighters and that kind of thing. That adds a whole nother layer to also, and if you notice, I haven't mentioned it yet, but a lot of things I'm talking about also play into LARP experiences. So if you do have LARPs, or you're working on a new LARP or whatever, a lot of the things I'm talking about add to that depth. So imagine having a LARP where you have a bridge that's active, and then you have people that are playing fighters, and they're in the officer's mess, and then the klaxons go on, and they all run to their individual simulators and hop in their fighters to go play. So yes, absolutely. And then Bacon of Span asks, I would love to see salvageable debris fields left over after explosions. Yes, sir. And let me make a comment here. This list that I'm going through, and we're still only on the near term, we haven't even gotten to the midterm yet, is not, I'm not going to even say this is complete. There are things that I've talked about that I'm already working on that I maybe left off this for one reason or another. But yes, absolutely. With the cluster engine that was just implemented in release 18 and 19 for areas of fields, whether that's a debris field or an asteroid field or whatever it is, minefield, etc. That's absolutely the intent, because we're going to talk about something on the next slide relative to finding items in the debris field, whether it's finding leftover components from a vessel or leftover cargo, etc. So yes, you should see some things like that hit. And then Bacon Span also asks, player control like a fighter of a salvage ship where you can pick up the right types of debris of a package mission item that was left over. So yeah, that ties right into what I was just saying. A good example might be, a future mission might be where you need to recover something from a ship, but that doesn't mean it has to be alive. You just have to pray that when you blow the ship up, the item is still floating around. Now, this is not on the list, but this is technically already in Horizons right now today. Just nobody really knows about it because as I've been working on the designer, it's there now. And if you go look in the designer, you'll see it under components. Components have the components themselves have a tolerance in terms of how easily they take damage, but so does commodities. Now that's referred to as volatility, and what that means is if it's volatile, like for example, if you have a barrel of highly volatile fuel, right, and that gets hit inside the ship, it will it literally will do a dice, like a good old-fashioned dice roll, to see if it explodes. And if it explodes, ship's taking damage. Could even take the ship out if they're carrying 100 barrels of volatile fuel and you hit one and they all go off in domino effect, that ship could go down. So volatility and that factor is already in the game. It's just not been implemented in terms of mission use, if you will. So that's the nuances. And you heard me talk when we started this about the fact that I really want to enhance the overall gameplay experience. We're starting to tie in all these little tendrils of things that I've been working on since the beginning of this project. And that's what's really exciting for me is over the last year, the project has matured in a way that has really allowed us to get to some neat places with the simulation and the experience. So, all right, where were we? We were on consoles. We talked about explosion indicators. Let's now talk about vessels. Cloaking. Yes, cloaking. And this is another item that I've actually had implemented secretly in the game pretty much from like the first weeks of the project. I've never turned it on because I wanted to be able to enhance the gameplay mechanics around cloaking. So all the mechanics are actually already in place for cloaking. So if a ship cloaks, they'll drop off radar. But there will be some ways to detect those ships. Now, not in the whole idea behind cloaking in the Horizons engine is more from a radar perspective. It is visual cloaking as well, but not Star Trek style cloaking where they go completely off the camera, if you will. They do have some refraction, so you'll still be able to potentially see a cloaked ship if you're looking through the cameras of your vessel, but not necessarily on the radar. So there'll be some neat things there where people will be able to actually use the cameras on the ship to try to find the bad guy, if you will. So we'll see how that goes. But cloaking will be coming very soon. And I talked about this with scan limitations. The next item is repair limitations. Again, this is about that gameplay balance. So if you've been paying attention in builds really over the last year, when ships launch, they always have a certain amount of a few cargo items already in play. One of them is raw materials. And raw materials is a generic construct of a commodity that is not one thing. It's not a piece of steel. It's not wires. It's not bolts. It's essentially a generic resource that is intended for overall repair, whether it's the hull, repairing a component, repairing a network component, rewiring something, etc. The whole point of raw materials is to be a generic resource. The whole point of it is really for repair. So what am I really saying? I'm saying that once you run out of raw materials, you can't repair anymore. That counts for the hull or components. what have you. So that's really important. And again, right now, today you have there's unlimited energy in terms of the ship never runs out of energy today. That will be changing too. And you have unlimited repair. You have lots of things are unlimited. All of that's going away to again tighten that experience. And then here we go. Okay, Bacon. Speaking of limited repair, can we dock at a space station or repair depot for repairs over and above the drone repairability of the ship's hull? You can do that today. So if you go to space dock or any friendly port, they will repair you and repair your hull beyond its repairability. So experienced players, if you take too much hull damage, you will take certain amount of damage where it is irreparable. So you might drop to where you can only repair up to 75% of your hull because you've taken so much damage. It's basically your internal structure has been physically damaged where you're not putting that back together until you get to a starport or a starbase or a space dock. So today, if you go to a space dock, you can fully repair your ship to 100% for exactly that reason. But additionally, you'll be able to find resources or trade for resources, both with friendly, if you're the Horizons Alliance stations or merchant stations where you can actually get raw materials so that you can keep stocking up on that as you go. Because for an individual mission, some of the limitations I'm talking about may not play as big a role. But when we get into the campaign mode and talk about campaigns, that's going to play a bigger role because obviously you're continuing on. So there's a lessening of returns, if you will, as you go through that experience. Okay. Pedia Viewer. So what the heck is a Pedia Viewer? So the Pedia Viewer is an encyclopedia. It's literally a wiki built into the game. So for module edit, for anybody that's a modder out there, you're actually able to create your own PD entries. And PD entries are really about lore, right? You're fleshing out the lore of the universe, whether it's talking about a planet, a star system, a particular famous vessel, a famous NPC character, whatever. And the point of that is to not only flesh out the world in which players are living and breathing in terms of their play, but also to leave nuggets and seeds for missions. In other words, you may have to do research to figure out how to complete a mission because you've got to go dig through the archives and find the right information to know what you're doing. And the PD entries are full HTML formatted content, so they can be pulled up just like just like Wikipedia almost, but built internally into the engine. And all stations will have access to this. So you'll actually have a link where you can pull up the Pedia list, and there'll be an on-screen keyboard if you have a touch screen, or if you have a regular keyboard, you'll be able to use that and type for instance, just like you're Googling. But it's all in-game and in-world. And that one I'm excited about just from an immersion and LARP standpoint to really be able to drive out some detail there. So, all right. First-time helper screens. Simple item, but one I want to really get done for new players. This one really simply is exactly what it sounds like. So when you start Horizons for the first time, hi, welcome to Horizons. I see it's your first time playing. You might want to make sure you do this, check that. Whether it's checking to make sure their ports are available so that they can run the consoles properly, like there's no antivirus software blocking them and things like that. Tools to help educate them on what to check for and how to fix things. When they go to the mission screen for the first time, hey, here's the mission screen. Here's what you do. So just little helper screens, really for new players. I think that'll really help because we do seem to have a lot of repeat of the same questions from new players, and not because they're doing it wrong. It's because, frankly, there needs to be better documentation or tools in the game, and the first-time helper screens is part of that. All right, question from Miles. Any plans for space dock supplies or a credit system? Something to allow the GM to reward a ship or location with supplies to repair or resupply, not necessarily a full restock. Absolutely. I don't really talk about it on these slides because it's as a single item, it's really baked into a lot of the things we've already talked about, but that's economy, okay? So the economy system will come out of a lot of things we've talked about and some things I'm going to be talking about on the second slide, where it's exactly a credit system so that you can find rare minerals on a planet and trade them in for credits that you can then go barter for this precious new laser that you found that you want to equip on the Horizons, right? Um, and this is important relative to what you're asking about. Engineering will have a new, and I don't even have it on these slides actually, and this is something I missed on these slides. I want to be real clear. This is a midterm item, so this wouldn't appear as part of the items on this slide, but this does relate to engineering, which is when you're in a friendly port, okay, you will have a new screen that allows you to reconfigure the ship, change out components, etc. So if you acquire new components, that's when you can then plop in new things. And so, Bacon or Spam, trade for more evil missiles. Yeah. Well, or trade for artifacts or some rare things that you might find in the game as you go, right? So, and the GM absolutely could just pepper, and we're going to be getting to that here shortly about the GM, so I'll talk more about that in a second. So actually, no, let's talk about it now. I forgot, we've got the Game Master area right here. So, Game Master, this one, as you see, has the most items on it for near term, because this is the one I'm working on, of all these things, actually, the most. I have always talked about Horizons as an experience that is meant to be kind of like Dungeons and Dragons in space, where you have your friends together, and either you're playing without a GM, you're playing through missions, right, or campaigns as those get built, and you're playing with your friends. Before COVID, obviously, you were playing, a lot of people were playing together, where they get together on a Friday night. Somebody brings the pizza, somebody brings the chips, somebody brings the Coca-Cola or the beer, depending on your preference. And you play for, the night, 5, 6, 7 hours, whatever it is. And as we dig into the open world and the campaign system, I really want to empower the Game Master to have all the tools at their disposal to not need a mission, to just throw them into an open space and start spawning stuff and weaving a tale that they want. So that's really the focus there. So let's talk about the individual items that are on this screen. Better spawn control. It's exactly what it sounds like. Today you can spawn individual vessels. You can say, okay, I want to spawn a Dashi faction dart, and I want to put it about 20,000 kilometers away from the player. Go, spawn it, right? So that works great today. But now you'll be able to actually, it ties into object management, which is before you spawn the item, you can say, okay, I want a Dashi dart. And then instead of just saying auto spawn, you can say detail, and it'll let you configure their components, whether change out a component, create damage on something, or dial their energy up, literally mess with the ship, almost like you were an engineer, and being able to change things around. Even change their disposition, change their, whether they're on patrol, what have you, and set all of that, and then spawn them to a specific place on the map, literally kind of like a drag and drop behavior. So all of that's coming, but then object comms override. So a few other games have this as well. This is not new to the bridge sim genre, but it's exactly what it sounds like, which is if the players message an NPC, instead of that NPC messaging back, if you flag that ship to be overridden, it will ask the Game Master that question from the players, and then they can respond with an open message, like just typing, or they can respond with some of the generic messages that you see, that would typically come from an NPC, but they can literally control it and do that kind of thing. So next for the Game Master is encounter management. So encounters is something that's officially coming with Release 20, which is this week. But encounters, for those of you that don't know, is literally like a good old-fashioned Dungeons and Dragons encounter table. So in the old days, you'd have, or really for, I say old days, but really for any Game Master system, role-playing system, you're going to have encounter charts that allow for this kind of thing. And what that's going to do for you is you can have a list of encounters for, say, the Dashi or Alliance or commercial traffic, and the Game Master will be able to pick from that list and say, okay, I want to generate commercial traffic, go. Just give me a random encounter from that. And it'll pull off that list and randomly create an encounter for them. Or they can go into that encounter chart and say, okay, I want this specific encounter, spawn that. And it's kind of like pre-generated experiences, so they don't have to go and do the detailed one I just talked about. They can just say, okay, give me a squadron of darts, give me, a fleet of anavs, whatever has been predefined. And you can create your own encounter charts too in your own modules. So you have the ability to flesh that out. So as a game master, if you're creating your own world for the players to be in, you can create all of your encounter charts ahead of time so that you know how you want to spawn them. Better player detail. Literally just the ability to see more information on a player that ties also to what you do with NPCs. So you can adjust the details of a player's ship to damage their components, turn something on or off live on the players so that they have to deal with that. So you can force, if you will, situations. Radar relative to selected ship is straightforward as it sounds. So if you've got players, if you've got, say, multi-bridge and you're the GM and you've got a player ship that's at Earth and then a player ship that's at Mars and then one's at the Horizon system, they're in 3 different maps, right? So if I select player B, it'll take me to their map, which honestly sounds like an obvious thing. Horizons is just never, the GM tool's just never done it. It's always natively stayed with the first player. So it's a simple adjustment, but it's something that'll just be nice for control. And then master object list. So being able to see everything that's currently active in the game, every object that's out there, whether it's on the player's radar or not. So you can then remove objects, move, so you can say, oh, I forgot I left that NAV over at Betelgeuse. Let me move that over to Mars. So you can just see a master list and then just pull from there. And so all of those things I'm talking about there should allow a game master to literally have a blank map with no mission and create a fully robust experience for their players, and really go to town for that. Whether it's for just a single little night of fun or you're doing a LARP, things like that, we really want to enhance those details. So that's what's coming with the Game Master screen. And lastly on this slide is missions, more missions, please. Everything that's on this slide has really leads to the last 2, which is new missions and training campaign. I have 3 missions that I'm working on that I have held back because I wanted them to have, frankly, more nuanced detail to how they work, more ability to, frankly, be more in depth, right? Just more to it than just go over here, kill the bad guy, save this friendly. And I really want to take some inspiration from, frankly, mission systems of the past. I'm an old schooler, so things like X-Wing and Wing Commander had really, really great mission structures where there was a lot going on and a lot more to do. And I really want to take advantage of that with how Horizons is designed. So a lot of these little things that I've been talking about on this slide drive right into new missions. And the training campaign, which Tour of Duty, which is an older mission that we've had, has been sunset because Tour of Duty is being repurposed as a short training campaign, which is a series of missions for brand new players to teach them all of the simple little nuances of how to work each console. So it's literally a training wheels. So Long Patrol has always been like the starter mission, and it still will stay that way. It's always been a classic, and it works very well. But the point of of Tour of Duty will be to be far more hand-holding and teaching them all the little things they need to do. Oh, here we go. Sorry, Miles. Let me grab your question. Can you spawn a wave event with multiple groups? Can you change the difficulty of an encounter? All ships damage shields to allow for making the existing encounter harder without adjusting each ship. Great question. So, yes, but there is a slight caveat to what you're asking there, and I'll explain. So when you create an encounter, and when I say create, I'm not talking about when the GM spawns it, but when you actually design your encounters, okay? You actually say, okay, this encounter is a dart, but I want, and you set a minimum and a maximum. So a minimum of 2, a maximum of 8. So what that means is, on that encounter, it will randomly generate between 2 and 8 darts. So that's the first part. So let's just say I rolled and it randomly generated 4 darts. Well, you can then flag on that individual encounter and say adjust for number of players. So if I randomly generated 4 darts, but then there are 2 players in the game, it will mathematically make it 4 darts to match the number of players. So it ramps up the difficulty based on that. So it does do that today. you will be able to make adjustments with the Game Master tools for a group of objects. I will say, with what I already have envisioned, Miles, to your question, is the idea would be you would spawn an encounter that you've predefined with some of those factors you're talking about, but then you can select a group of objects and make any adjustments you want there. So to get it to your exact question, it would be a two-step process, but you can do it, if that makes sense. And then let's see, we've got another question. Ever dreamed about letting the players actually move as the character in if considered something? So just to be clear, Valak, are you talking about like inside the ship in first person, like FPS style? Yeah. Long term, I'll be real honest about that. Not in version 1. And when I say version 1, I mean like final release, because Horizons is an early access title. And it will remain that until we get to the last item on the third slide. Because I've said this before, and this is not a spoiler, I've always said this, that when we finally finish the full campaign, and the full campaign is meant to be many, many hours of gameplay, that's the end of version 1. So I will say that first person will not be part of Horizons version 1. It's just not in what we're trying to do. There are other games like Pulsar Lost Colony that do it very well. And so we're going to kind of stay in our area. There will be some first-person aspects relative to fighters. So, just being in a cockpit, right? So that's sort of first-person from that perspective because you're in a cockpit, but not like you're asking about, like not walking around the ship in first-person, no. But great question, fair to ask. But yeah, and it's interesting, especially being a single developer, focus is about saying no. And if I implemented everything I'd want to do with Horizons, this would be in development for the next 20 years. And I've already been at it for 7. I'll grant you a lot of that 7 years was in spare time, part-time, like weeknights and weekends, late nights, that kind of thing, which is why it's taken 7 years to get here. But I don't plan on doing version 1 for another 7 years, and I don't think anybody wants to wait that long either. So, all right, let's move on. That's near term. So this is, again, everything in this slide is things I'm actively working on right now, in one capacity or another. Yeah, and thank you, Villa. He said, actually, I prefer that you're giving priority to ship control depth. Yeah, and that's the focus, is I want the immersion to be on, and you heard me talk about the deduction, right? Player deduction. And I'll roll back briefly before we hit the next slide, is, somebody asked about mini games, right? I want the game part of this not to be a mini game, but to be a deduction thing where you're presented a list of information, whether it's a chart, or a scan, whatever it is based on your station. And that has something in there that's important for you to know, but you as the player have to pay attention and find it, right? So it's a deduction kind of thing. I put more emphasis on that from a gameplay standpoint than, as I mentioned, the mini game thing, because I'm relying on the player to have the cunning to figure out what the issue is and why, and therefore solve the problem, if that makes sense. All right. That was near term. Let's talk about midterm and what that represents. Midterm. Items that are slotted for work in early 2021. So I mentioned, what I'm actually working on will take me into 2021, into the early part of it, but starting in early 2021, we'll certainly transition to the midterm items. And I put that skeleton up there because I have some players that have been with me from the early years that have heard me talk about some of these items, and they're like, what's up? Where are they at? Well, let's talk about them. All right. This is a little bit shorter list, and the list is going to get shorter because we're achieving a lot of our goals. And some of these are small and are kind of put in the back burner, and some of them are really big. So let's start right up at the top here. Flight with course plotting. Course plotting is exactly what it sounds like, where it's a nuanced level of detail that I would call nice to have. I wouldn't say this is gameplay critical in terms of gameplay balancing, but I've always loved the idea of navigational course plotting. And so I'm going to be adding that in. Again, I call it a nice to have, and I'm not putting it in the near term because I have other things we want to do first. But you'll see some nice things there. So course plotting will then take time. So you can't just say, select this planet and go. You have to actually lay in the course. So if you need to get out of there in a hurry, it may be a problem. So, that's kind of where we're going with that. Let's see. Science Rob. With my experience gained with your MQTT integration, I'm excited to play with Horizons and MQTT props and Terminal IO. I will, Science Rob, ping me if I don't bring this back up. I actually will talk more about that when we finish up this slide and the next slide, because I'll have kind of an open area if people have open questions. Let me circle back to that because I do have some things to comment about there. So, and thank you for that, by the way. I appreciate that very much. So, midterm tactical threat analysis. This correlates very simply to what you might find in an MMO. Whether it was a classic MMO like UO or EverQuest or of course World of Warcraft now, what have you, is when you see an NPC out there, they traditionally have some kind of color coding, right? They're green, they're blue, they're red, they're purple, and that tells you either go get them or you need to run and run now, right? Tactical will be able to make a threat analysis. They have to actively do it. So they have to perform a threat analysis on that. But that threat analysis will be based on only what science has garnered from their scans. So the threat analysis may be complete, may not be. You don't know. But they can say, hey, this ship is, twice our guns, twice our firepower. This is not good. We need to get out of here. Or, oh, this is 4 darts. We got this. Don't worry about it, Captain. Go for it. Right? So, again, talking about that deduction, the tactical officer will be able to do a threat analysis. Now, I teased at it on the previous slide. Shield modifications. What does that mean? So this one I'm really excited about, and I have not told anybody about this, but I'm letting the cat out of the bag here. And this is, again, I don't want to get anybody overexcited. This is coming middle of 2021 probably. The idea is not the shield frequencies like we talked about. Not at all. It's about adjusting the shield's influence. So imagine that your shields, cover your ship today, but there's an NPC vessel that you want to protect, but they don't have shields. What if you came up right alongside them and then the tactical officer adjusted your shields to be twice the distance, right? So now the shields encompass that friendly NPC and protect them. The caveat is for however you adjust those shields, it will obviously reduce their strength and capability. So it's a trade-off. But it's a tactical capability, strategic, literally a tactical capability, but also a strategic one for your players. So that's one I'm excited about. Okay, let's see. Bacon and spam. Can science's scans decrease accuracy when increasing speed or range with an overpower? Or can sciences be allowed to use the power of engineering directs to them for different perks? That's going to be based on your sensors. So it's not really directing power to sciences, it's directing power to your sensors. So to a degree, what you're asking, yes. So based on how engineering puts power into the sensors, they can, again, extend or retract their capability. And range will play a factor in the accuracy of your scans. So I mentioned it before, we're going to start limiting what scans can do so that they're not all powerful. But if you're going at burst speed and trying to scan something, you may not get an accurate read. So there, you keep hearing me say dice rolls. We're going to introduce more dice rolls to things so that there is more randomness to what happens in the universe. And that includes what happens when you scan and what other factors are occurring. A good one is, you can't scan something that you won't be able to scan something that's behind a planet. So that one's, I can't wait for that one. That's going to be fun. All right, so tactical. Last item there, system targeting. Again, there's other bridge sims that have this. We'll finally be implementing this in Horizons, and it just adds a nice little bit of depth to tactical capabilities to say, take out their engines or take out their thrusters so they can't move, but you're not damaging them to destroy them. You're trying to cripple them, right? Or you might want to cripple them and take out their weapons, but not their their engines, or you want to blind them, which is taking out their sensors. So that's going to be a big thing. Is you'll be able to blind ships, and ships will be able to attempt to blind you by damaging your sensors. So imagine being your flight officer, or tactical officer, or sciences, and they've damaged your sensors, and your screen just goes blank because your radar is now empty. So let's see, syntax. Scans should be complete enough to be able to target a specific system, I would think. You mean with today's? Yes, it is. I just need to add in the user interface elements for tactical, and that's what we're waiting on. So the midterm item is actually is just being able to say I want to target this, giving them the ability to specify. So operations, again, formerly communications, deck communications. This is you already see as the operations officer, comms officer, the deck status, right? So when you change status, they report in at different speeds. If you didn't know this, they chime in based on the NPC, the deck officer NPC's capability. Like how good are they? That's how quickly they're chiming in. It actually has that level of detail. But what you'll start seeing as operations is deck 5, red alert confirmed, or deck 5, we have a hull breach. This is deck 5, we have casualties, so on and so forth, and be able to have a lot of nice nuances there. Additionally, moving on to operations, 3D NPCs on screen. This is something that I've wanted for a long time. We'll finally be putting it into play middle of next year, which is being able to bring up an NPC that you're talking to on screen, just Star Trek style, where they're up there on screen, and then the captain can see them and tells the comms officer, demand they surrender. And then they will reply back to you, but on screen. So it'll create much more of a role play capability. And going back to the Game Master controls, you can say, hey, demand their surrender. And then the Game Master can say, nope. And then that character will respond in kind. Again, creating more depth there. So let's see, Hemacast. I'm rather excited for the possibilities and event trees for missions and campaigns with the ability to disable ships and being partially disabled. Yeah, I'm going to kind of call myself out on this. Is with Horizons, there have been features that have been there since 2014, but they frankly haven't seen usage because I have not either documented them properly or given players the ease of use tools like the designer that's now out there, that's still in beta, but it's out there for players to use, to create their own content and missions and events and everything. But now that that's there, and we're continuing to evolve that, to your point, Hemacast, I think that will finally see some depth and brevity that I think will be really amazing for the community to be able to create their own content. But also, these tools are for me as much as they are for the community. But I love what we're starting to see out of the mod community, and I can't wait to see more. It kind of ties in with the 3D NPCs on screen, but NPC dialogue audio. So that doesn't have to just be them on 3D. Like if you're getting a message from a fighter, you're just getting audio dialogue, but it'll be like, Roger that, Horizons, or, Red Squadron reporting in, that kind of thing. And many, many games have this. It's something I've wanted for a while. And it's not a technical issue or a programming one. It's content, meaning, excuse me, getting in all the different voice actor content that we need to do to have that in there. So that's why this is a midterm item. It's not that we can't do it sooner. It's just that's going to take a little time. So I mentioned it on operations in terms of, hey, we have casualties on deck 5. A new station will finally rear its head, and this one is one I've also talked about for a while, which is medical. Medical will absolutely be a casual play experience, not a requirement for missions unless the designer of a mission wants it to be. Like, if they're designing a LARP experience or a campaign that they want for their players, where medical is important. And medical is going to do exactly what you think they will. Health analysis, disease control, disease management, healing, etc. Now, they will be limited by their supplies just the same. So there'll be medical supplies that will limit how much you can heal and provide care for as you go through it. And you could potentially provide the wrong care and kill a crew member. Shame on you. But you'll absolutely be able to do that. Tying in with medical is area effects. And this is really about area effects like in the universe, not on a ship. Radiation, for example, or magnetic pulls, or ultraviolet light, things like that, where you can intentionally have areas. And I'm going to spoil the next one, nebulas, where you have nebulas that are many thousands of kilometers in size, not these little tiny things that just hide one ship, but giant nebulas that you say you fly in there without your shields up, and the whole ship gets radiation poisoning. Well, your medical staff's going to be busy, right? But they also could be weapons that somebody detonates near you that has radiation-related poisoning, a nuclear effect, etc. So all that can play a role. And see, let's see. So is medical a player? Yes, medical will be a player. Absolutely. Yes, it'll be a playable station. And it's an optional station. And I haven't made a decision yet, but the idea would be like, let's say nobody's officially playing it, but you can already do this now. If there's an unmanned station in the top right corner, you can actually switch between stations that are unmanned. So somebody could take over medical, do some things real quick, and go back to their station if they wanted to. So it allows for you to kind of hop around if you need to. So even you could dual roll it because ideally, if you're doing everything well, you've got no damage, and you're flying around normally, and medical's not going to be doing anything. So, and that's just the truth of it. So we don't intend medical to be a station that's manned 24/7 during a campaign. But if you have friends over that are just kind of there watching you guys play, and they kind of casually play medical to help out whenever it's needed, that's the intent. Or again, in this world where a lot of people are playing virtually, if somebody just wants to hang out and watch, being able to do that. Bacon or Spam, can we be teleported to another part of the galaxy because we went into the Badlands and have to team up with the bad guy and form a single crew to get home? Okay. Every time you think you hear nebulas, you think of Star Trek Voyager. Every time I think of nebulas, I think of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, but that's just me. So I'm going to make an interesting point, though, and we can thank Syntax 7 for this, is one of the abilities that the Game Master will have, and can be a triggered event, capable, like an action in the game world, is being able to transfer players from ship A to ship B. So imagine you've got players on the Horizons, but then two like real world players hop into a shuttle and then take that shuttle out to go do something and come back by design, right? So two players can say, okay, I'm going to hop in shuttle Alpha, and they literally transfer their consoles transfer to being the shuttle rather than being on the Horizons in my example, and then go out and do something, and they can redock and come back and then retake their positions if you want to. And the same would be true as if you had three shuttles that converged on the Horizons and they all docked and took over their stations on the Horizons. And that's kind of ties into the LARP experiences that you keep hearing me refer to. But imagine being able to have it where you start off on a shuttle and you fly to space dock and you dock with the Horizons, and then you transfer from the shuttle to the Horizons. You'll be able to do that. So that kudos to Syntax 7 for that one. That goes to your question there. And planets. This ties back to a question we had on the last slide, which is locations on planets, whether it's bases, cities, colonies, tribal areas, whatever. A physical location that you can define on a planet, so that when you're scanning a planet, I talked about scan details. This ties into that, where when you're scanning a planet, you can see, the scan details are about minerals and life forms and things like that, but you'll also be able to see literal cities that you could send a shuttle or party to as well. Have you ever considered boarding actions such as enemy intruders aboard the ships? That ties into exactly what I'm talking about right now. It ties to planets, but it really ties to planets or vessels, which is being able to send parties over to do exactly that. And vice versa, frankly. There's nothing stopping somebody, an NPC from sending a raiding party to you and killing off your crew. See, Miles Tag. Because Starship Horizons uses one view screen, if you change to a shuttle, you need another copy of the game to run the shuttle view screen. Same idea with fighters. Would each fighter need its own view screen? That's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. Today, every individual vessel would be its own. If you want a separate view screen for each one, it would be a separate copy of Horizons. That's true today. I'm going to talk about something on the last slide that will change that a little bit. But yet, now keep in mind, and I want to really stress this: the main view screen, while very nice, in terms of the look and feel of it, is not required to play as a member of any vessel. All you need is the console relative to run the ship, right? Whether it's flight, tactical, engineering, whatever. So you don't actually need that main view screen for that experience, except cloaking, right? Yeah, I can't see anything. Why? Well, if the ship's cloaked, that's great. If the ship's cloaked, how can you see the console? Anyway, that's another question. All right. So, but with planets, locations, more 3D detail, just fleshing those out. Again, providing more detail to the universe. The science will certainly get more out of that. So let's hop over to the other side here, which is a generic ship console. What the heck is that? So a generic ship console is, if you think of like any sci-fi show, series, whatever, movie, whatever, and you walk through a ship, right? You'll see just consoles here and there on the walls in the hallway and whatever. And just imagine Horizons with a generic console. If you're doing a LARP event or if you're doing one at home and you just want a generic console there for access, it's literally an open console that can give you access to the pedia and give you access to various parts of it, really like an operating system. And that you can even hop to a console like flight, tactical, operations, medical. So you'll see all the consoles evolve with this concept in play, which is where they all come, the interface takes on more of an operating system feel than kind of individual rigid consoles. But imagine, again, having the idea where you can just pull up a console and go through the pedia to do some research or pull up a galactic chart, whatever the case may be. And it has nothing to do with flight, tactical sciences, communications, or operations, engineering, or captain. Let's see, Miles, I'm just wondering if the cockpit of a fighter would fall inside the definition of a view screen, or if the fighter would fly by radar view only. No, if you're planning ahead with your experience, I would say a fighter is absolutely its own view screen, because a fighter pilot's going to want that. There's no question. That's part of the fun, right? So I would say without question, that's the case. Now, the examples I gave of transferring ships, I would say if you're setting this up as an experience, that person would be that ship, that fighter would already be a client attached to the experience, just docked on board the Horizons or whatever ship you have, waiting to launch. So it's not them transferring in the sense that I'm talking about. Like, they are always, like, that's their ship. So they just get to launch at a certain point and then come back, right? The examples I was giving was more if I'm literally transferring from the bridge of ship A to the bridge of ship B as an officer. If I'm a fighter pilot, like I said, that would be, again, your own client that is already set up by the game master or whoever's creating the experience, if that makes sense. That would be the idea. Let's see. Bacon said, repeat because it seemed to be missed. So with player injury disease, does that mean that players have unique identifiers that can be tracked from station to station and perhaps have proficiencies in those stations? Okay, let's talk about that. NPC characters, and I'm talking about the ones on your ship as well as enemies, right? NPC ships. But like the crew on your ship has that today. It's like they have, whether they're good in engineering, they're good at science, they're good at medical, like they have a proficiency. And they have a heart rate, they have an oxygen level, they have health, all of that today. So yes, they have proficiencies, okay? And from a game standpoint, the vessel is the character in the story sense. Okay, so the vessel is where you'll upgrade it with things over time to make it better. But when it comes to the players, and by players I mean human people that are playing the game, okay, they are themselves. So you don't really buff yourself with anything per se, and you won't. That's not something you'll see me implement. I have always believed that it goes back to the deduction and sleuthing you heard me talk about. if I do enough of my job right in terms of how I want to make this gameplay more robust, I'm creating these instances and this information that's kind of sitting out there, again, depending on what station you're on, might be sciences or whatever, where the information's sitting out there, and a game master may feed these little chips to players so that, if they say are having trouble figuring out what that deduction needs to be, the game master can feed them chips on what they need to learn. But you as a player will always be you, so there won't be any buffs or changes for what you are. However, the next item on the list is buffs, which applies to the vessel and its components. And a buff is just like something you might have in an MMO, for example, where you might find something that boosts your component's capability by 50%. And individual ships will have a certain number of generic slots based on the ship itself, and components will have a certain number of slots. Now, that's going to be different per component. Cheaply made components may have 0. Whereas, decent components may have 1 slot, whereas really nice, expensive components might have 2. So you can add different buffs in, and this allows you to, again, reconfigure the vessel. This reconfiguring can only occur, again, in dock. That's by design. So you have to, be thoughtful about when you're going to do these changes. Let's see, Bacon of Spam. Would you consider a cheaper pilot's license that allows a user to run a view screen for a fighter but not a capital ship? Yes, that is under consideration. I don't know if it was you that asked me before, Bacon, but somebody else has. I have not made a formal decision, but I am absolutely entertaining the idea. And really the question drives to, today on Steam, or if you purchased early access before Steam, Horizons is a $60 title because it's for 6 players. So yes, you're paying $60 for Horizons, but you're paying it for 6 players. So it's really like $10 a player is really what you're getting. So, and it was phrased in the Discord perfectly, which is it's free to play and pay to host. So basically, if you want to host a bridge, you do have to own a copy of the game. But if you want to play on someone else's bridge, it's free because you just load it up in your browser, right? So the question is, hey, if I just want to be able to play a fighter and I can't host a mission, but I can just do a fighter, could there be a less expensive copy of Horizons out there? So Bacon, I would say it's absolutely on the table. It will not happen in the near term, that first slide. I will make a decision during that time on what tact I'm going to take there. I love the idea. I just need to have some considerations on how I want to implement that. But I absolutely could say that you will see something like that is a limited license for like a single fighter or single player experience kind of thing. So good question. Thank you for that. So let me kind of finish up on buffs now. So we talked about it briefly, and yeah, it's literally being able to enhance objects, whether it's 50% power, 50% range on something, etc., where you can increase components, and it could be artifacts that you find that act like buffs that you can enhance objects with, or the vessel, and go from there. So that's and those will be things. And this goes back to the question about wreckage. I mentioned I was going to mention about this more. Is like imagine finding in the wreckage, you find a few artifacts that are floating in there that were from the wreckage of an old, a ship that's thousands of years old. You found from another civilization, and those buffs allow you to do certain things with your ship. And you could absolutely find those in wreckage or on a planet with a long gone civilization, etc. Midterm missions, other short campaigns. I mentioned on the first slide the training campaign. You'll see some others kind of dabbled in there. And during the midterm, during this phase, we will start to formulate the long-term campaign. So that will start to take shape, and we'll probably even release it in a beta form as that campaign starts to form during this slide. It will not be complete during this phase of development, but we'll certainly start the full campaign. And I refer to the full campaign just like a very large D&D module that takes many, many hours to complete, with the idea being you get your buddies together and you play once a week every night and go through the campaign with a full story arc. So that will start then. By the way, for those of you who don't know, and we've got some experienced players that have been asking some questions in here and some new ones as well, but everything I've been talking about capability-wise is part of the things that you can mod or use to create your own experiences, your own missions, your own campaigns, your own modules and worlds. to create your own things that you want to do. And that's the thing that I'm really excited about. Is Horizons was built from the ground up with the idea of letting the community create their own content. So that's something that I'm really excited about, especially as it's matured. Oh, I did. You're right. Okay, I got corrected. Thank you, everyone. I skipped enhanced dialogue. This is really the last piece of the dialogue engine that I'll be changing. The dialogue engine today is actually very robust. I'm very happy with it because you can have branching dialogue just like a full-blown, NPC conversation you might have on an advanced AAA title RPG that's out there, where you can, go through really in-depth the dialogue trees that branch and fold and turn and whatnot. And you can even trigger custom events and actions during all of that, so that, you might say something to offend them and then they attack you, right? Or you might say something to them that finally gets them to say, okay, I believe you, I'll come to your side, what have you, where you can change that NPC's interaction towards you. The last thing with enhanced dialogue we'll be adding is, it's a small thing, but it is part of our development cycle that I wanted to call out, is, and this ties into classic RPGs, which is where, if you think of, say, like a classic Ultima or something like that, where you can just ask generic questions as you're educated. I'll give you an example. You go on a mission where Starbase Alpha says, hey, we need you to go to the following sector, and there were reports of a raid. We don't have much more information than that, but the following MacGuffin was reported in the area. And MacGuffin, of course, is some mysterious object, in Hollywood terms that they use. So go find out about this MacGuffin. So then you go, and then the operations officer has a new dialogue option to ask anyone. So it's not just specific to a single NPC. It's just like, hey, do you know anything about this MacGuffin? Hey, do you know anything about this MacGuffin? And if, they may not, and they say, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Or they could say, hey, yeah, I know about that MacGuffin. I think I saw it over in this other sector. So it creates this, again, more of an RPG style interaction. It's just the last component to dialogue to where I feel it's really rock solid and has everything I've wanted from the day one, and that's the last piece. So thank you, Syntax, for calling that out, that I missed that. I appreciate that, sir. So moving on to the vessels on this slide, which is variants. This idea really comes from my background with a wonderful tabletop game called BattleTech. Played it for many years, starting in the early 80s. It's been a personal favorite of mine, but they always had a concept, and this is fully lifted from them. I take no prisoners on this one, where you had, a particular mech, like say a Warhammer, and then but you might load it out 2 or 3 different ways. So the physical structure of that mech in terms of BattleTech is the same, but you load it out differently. So it's predefined templates or variants in this case. So imagine having, the Dart and then the Dart B or the Dart D or the Dart D2, and that had different loadouts. Maybe one has missiles. Maybe one has one large cannon on it and nothing else, where you've changed the loadout. But again, it's not about creating an entirely new vessel class. It's just saying, hey, I want to take this existing vessel class with this current definition, and I want to then modify it and just switch out the components to be this. I want to give it smaller engines, heavier weapons, and switch it out. So you can create variants on existing vessel classes, which is, again, really just about loadouts. Models, detail improvements. The models is really about a simple little thing, but I have it on here just because I love certain levels of detail. And this is really about ship labeling. And I'm talking about the 3D rendered ship that you have in the game. So with labeling, it's as simple as like when you fly by the Horizons and seeing on the side ASC 1864 or, on a Dart, Blue 6 or whatever. So, and with insignias that are based on their factions and things like that. So, and many, many games have this, this is nothing new by any stretch of the imagination, but you'll start to see that finally in the midterm where I've just added that level of detail to the 3D world. It's just something I've wanted for a while. And excuse me, I think it adds to the experience. Okay, let's see, bacon or spam. I still like the idea of a rigid cargo shuttle filled with fertilizer and a separate one rigged with seats for Marines. So there's no reason you couldn't have that. And you mentioned Marines. You will see, and it's not technically on any of these slides, but it's part of just a lot of things we've talked about. You'll see the complement of the ship change a little bit, which is the crew that's on board will be more fine-tuned. And that's part of, again, both of these slides, where you'll actually have Marines that are dedicated to combat. And then you have medical and you have operations and engineering. But I'm not talking about the players. I'm talking about the NPCs that are on your ship. They're doing all the normal tasks, repairing everything that's on the ship that's running. But you'll have Marines. That goes back to the question earlier about being able to throw Marines on there and send them over to another vessel as a boarding party to try to take that ship over, for example, and issuing them orders in the same way you would issue a vessel orders, in the exact same way, actually. So, Bacon, that's absolutely on the table for things we are doing, sir. Okay. The last item on this slide, and we're getting close to the end here. I know we're running pretty long here. This is great. And great questions, by the way, everybody, is a Steam Workshop. So, I actually have a lot of the plumbing for this already in place. We already have Steam integration, of course. We have some Steam achievements out there, which the Steam achievements will grow in time as well. But I just need some time to be able to fine-tune the Steam Workshop, which will tie into the designer and the module system that's already in Horizons. So you'll be able to create a module and maybe just create a vessel class or a mission or a whole list of components that you want to throw out there as your list of magical components that you've created. And whatnot, and be able to release it on Steam Workshop. So we will absolutely be supporting Steam Workshop. But again, you should look at that as a mid-term, mid next year type of item. Miles, any idea for crew stress that medical has to handle? Maybe mental breaks. Aha! So yes. So part of medical, and I guess I glossed over this a little bit, but there will be conditions that players will have to deduce on NPC characters. Now that can be crew, that can be passengers. It doesn't just have to be crew that's serving on your ship. If you might have passengers on board that have an illness, for example, and you have to figure out what it is, right? It could be the common cold, could be COVID 2021. Who knows, right? But those conditions can be psychosomatic, psychosis, can be viral, can be genetic. So you'll have a range of conditions that tie into exactly that, Miles. There's actually a whole list I already have predefined. It's about 15 different condition types that then by themselves have individual ones underneath it. But yeah, you could actually have somebody that's literally has used to be called shell shock or post-traumatic stress disorder. They may be suffering from that after their deck was. The hull was penetrated, 7 members were killed, and maybe that freaked them out enough where they're just curled up in sick bay and can't handle it. That's the kind of stuff we will be getting to. And that you hear a lot of this from me because I love detail whenever we can put it in there because it just adds to the experience for players. Okay. All right, so long-term items that are slotted for later 2021 and beyond. And well, I just put the sloth in there because obviously they're the last on the list. They're the last items to get done. Not that we're being slow about it. It's just everything takes time, right? So this is a shorter list. This is kind of the end of the evening, if you will, until we do open questions. But there's some big items on here. The biggest one on here, frankly, is the last one, which is the main campaign, which I've talked about tonight. And it'll have the most... It's the largest content item we have on the list. And so I've always said that version 1 will be done, signed, sealed, delivered, and in the can when we finish main campaign. But along for that, during the long-term phase, the top item is something I'm excited for, which is built-in player audio-video communications. And so a lot of people use Horizons today over the internet. They use things like TeamSpeak or Zoom or Discord to share their bridge audio with their players so they can talk back and forth. And then they stream, the video screen, the main view screen that way too. But I want to build in audio comms into Horizons, not just for player to one bridge to talk to each other, but for one vessel to talk to another vessel. Okay. And then include video comms so that just like Star Trek, you've got Vessel A, player Vessel A, and player Vessel B able to actually bring up video comms and be there, be like, raise the shields and all that kind of stuff, and have some great interactions that way, especially for people that set up LARPs or set up permanent installations where they want to do some exciting stuff like that, and tie into some of the electronic integrations, which I will hit on when we're wrapped up here. A smaller item, but it is something that we are going to continue to evolve, is matchmaking improvements. So that right now we do have a multi-bridge connector where you can find other multi-bridges out there and connect in over the internet, so that two different vessels can play together, and it handles all of the network address translation, all the hole punching, everything you have to do to get that to work. But we'll just make some nice enhancements where you can actually have a friends list of people that you're used to playing with and seeing if they're online and things like that. Those will just be things we'll work on. Let's see, syntax. Could the ship call space dock and end up talking to the GM? Yes. So that goes back to what I talked about. So the GM will have the ability to override any communication. Now that can be just the dialogue we talked about, but it could also be the audio. Like, in other words, if they're calling space dock and the GM can actually take over that channel and take over the audio channel and talk to them. So that goes back to the D&D style of things, where it's like, you can put on a different voice, be like, yeah, this is space dock. What do you want? And have great fun with that. Or if you want to, like, I know some LARP groups and game masters have talked to me where they'll have like people in costume where they can put them on, and it could be an alien costume where they're like, we demand you surrender, and have all that kind of fun. So all of that, yes, ties into exactly that syntax, being able to have that kind of fun. Where there'll be a delay for voice vid comms to represent cosmic distances. Not for some of this. Not for now. All of that we can implement all of that very easily. But from a playability standpoint, for players to enjoy that, if they have to wait 6 minutes for a signal to come through, that's just not fun. Sounds neat. It's neat from a science standpoint, but not really something realistic for day to day, for live gameplay, if you will. But technically very easy to accomplish, actually, mathematically, with how everything works today. Single player fighter mission campaigns. So we've talked about it throughout the different slides here, but really having a dedicated set of missions for just a single player game and even a campaign. Now, this item right here would tie back to the question that was asked earlier about having a less expensive single player licensed copy, right? So I would see, if you bought the full version, you get it anyway, but like that content would be explicitly for somebody that might buy the cheaper licensed version when we get there. That's why I said I'm fully on board with doing it. It's just a matter of when I can get that in the timeline to do a single, a less expensive version that's just for a single copy, to do the main view screen as a fighter, and to participate as that single copy in a larger LARP experience or a larger multi-bridge experience. WebGL. So what the heck is WebGL? So WebGL is really a hardware rendering in a web browser. So doing the same thing that we're doing with the main view screen, but doing it in a web browser. It's, most of your modern browsers handle this okay today. It has some limitations, but the idea would be to really allow you to pull up the main view screen in the web browser. And it's not streaming, it's actually rendering in the browser right there, so that you wouldn't need to share the main view screen through a streaming service. You'd be able to pull it up just in your browser natively. So that would be the intent there, for sure. That's an item we have on there. And of course, I've already mentioned it, but the last item, of course, is the main campaign, which we want to have. I really have some grand visions for that. And it comes from my experiences playing some incredible games that are still worth playing today, by the way, whether it's the full original X-Wing campaign or the original Wing Commander campaign or Star Control 2's campaign were many, many hours of play. And it's something that I'm aspiring to have with Horizons. And the storyline actually has evolved really well. So we actually know a lot of what's going to be happening with the storyline. But at the end of the day, that's our big piece here. All right, HEMAcast. I might have missed it, but when is the fighter console going to get playable? Near term, midterm? Excellent question. I didn't point it out here. A midterm, sir. I would put that in the midterm category, not long term. Just so that has that ability. Let's see. Wing Commander 2 Prophecy was the first game series I really got into. And yeah, most of the Wing Commanders, and I'll throw Privateer in that mix as well, all had that kind of, the storyline was really well done. You got invested not just in the missions, but the storyline around them. And that's really what I want for Horizons. I want that kind of feel for players to have that kind of investment. So that's really important to me. But that's really it for the roadmap as we have it right now. It's a lot of stuff. I mean, we've been talking for an hour and a half plus, but I wanted to have an opportunity for everybody to see this. We'll wrap up with anybody that's in the chat. Did you have any questions that maybe either I didn't answer or you wanted more information on? I'll open it up real quick for a few minutes here, and then we'll call it a night. Let's see. And hopefully, by the way, for those of you that are kind of watching this, either in the past or recording, is hopefully this has been really informative about what we're trying to do with Horizons and what we see as the future of what we want to do here. No more questions here. Thank you for the awesome job you've done so far. And thank you, everyone, for those that have played and those that have learned about Horizons through Steam and those of you who've been around or the project since its inception. I think all of you are what are really empowering me to do more and more with Horizons every day. So, lots to unload here. I'm sure there'll be questions later. So I will finish with this. Next week, expect to have, we've talked about the roadmap this week. I will be having another session at 6 o'clock next week where I will be talking directly about the designer. So I'm going to actually go through it in an overview. So I'm not going to go into individual detail about every section, but I'm just going to cover the designer and all of the capabilities you have as a modder to create your own content and really give you an overview of what you can do with the Horizons modular system. So that'll be next week's, this same bat time, same bat channel here on Twitch next week at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And for those of you who don't know, and I'll put a link on the Twitch stream once we finish up here, is we have a great community that's in our Discord channel, the Starship Horizons Discord. You can search for it in the Discord main chart, is Starship Horizons. Or if you go to starshiphorizons.com, there's a link right up there in the top. And there's also links in our Facebook page. But we have a really active community there. We also have predefined bridge channels for people to use. So you can hop in and play with others just by hopping in the Discord. You don't have to have a copy of the game to play. As long as somebody's in there hosting, you can hop in a game and try it. If you've never tried Horizons and you're curious, you can come in and join us. We always have active groups on Wednesday nights. And then there are impromptu groups that spring up from time to time. And you can even go into Discord, and we have special abilities for you to flag yourself and say, hey, I'm looking for a bridge to play. So you'll get notified when a bridge is available as well. So, again, thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. It's been a great first stream here on Twitch. And look forward to more. And we'll see you next week, everybody. Have a great night.